I'm Scott Jurek, and I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and I've been running ultramarathons for over 21 years now. And it's been a sport that I have a real passion for, and just love being out in the woods, out in the mountains, and exploring my potential.
So, what inspired you to take on the Appalachian Trail?
For me, I've always wanted to do one of the national scenic trails, and throughout my ultra running career, because it takes a good chunk of time as well as the recovery following it. And I also wanted to just have the wisdom and experience to really do my best at something like a national scenic trail. And I have always looked at the history of the sport of ultramarathoning and records on the Appalachian Trail. I've had a huge amount of respect and just admiration. I've read so much about Scott Williamson and some of the through hikes that he's done, yo-yoing the Pacific Crest Trail, and spending a lot of time out west. I lived in Seattle for 11 years and would always go out to the Pacific Crest Trail and spend time running and hiking and backpacking. And I knew at some point in my career, I wanted to do one of the national scenic trails. And it would have made most sense probably to do the Pacific Crest Trail because I just had such a passion for that trail and was so connected with it being out west. But I felt like there was a pull to the Appalachian Trail. I'd only seen maybe 30 some miles of the trail, bits and pieces, run JFK 50 miler, which has 13 miles of the trail, and spent a little bit of time out east, but I'd never explored the Appalachian Mountains. And for me, it just seemed like I wanted to check out a new part of the country, going from the south to the north along the east coast and experiencing the people. And the Appalachian Trail is just steeped in history, of course, being the oldest and probably the baddest trail out there when it comes to just ruggedness. And then the through hiking culture. For me, I've spent a lot of time in the wilderness, in the woods, all by myself, and love that experience. But there was something that I was drawn to it, that social connection and hearing about the history. And the whole idea really started with the Appalachian Trail of doing these long trails and continuum, and from start to finish, having that through hike experience. So
when people are usually pursuing an FKT, they do the southbound version. Is there any reason you chose to go northbound?
It's definitely a good question, because a lot of people who are really into records and taking a look at it, all of the last record attempts have been set from north to south, including most recently Heather Anderson's self-supported. And it definitely made sense. But for me, I wanted, it was probably going to be my one shot to do this. My wife said, okay, you have one shot to do this. It's a big time commitment. And she was game to support me. I thought to myself, I want to really go, even though I couldn't walk with spring like most of the thru hikers, I could still go the direction that thru hikers have traditionally gone. And when you're going from north to south, you kind of just pass by. There's a few southbounders out there on the trail, but you just kind of pass by the northbounders, and you don't really get to have that conversation as well as share miles.
How did the AT differ from your expectations?
For me, I had this respect going in, and I guess when I got to New Hampshire and Maine, I knew it was going to be super difficult. However, after getting through Pennsylvania and the rocks of Pennsylvania, I was blown away with just the sheer difficulty. And sometimes it didn't even feel like a trail. Sometimes it just felt like slabs of rock mixed in with roots. And I was just blown away. And that's one thing I think that's different from the West and the Rockies. You have a lot of paths that were built for stock animals and horses. And here on the Appalachian Trail, it's just foot travel. So I think that's the biggest difference, is that the trail is so rugged that even walking, 1 to 2 miles an hour is a chore.
Approximately 300 miles into your through hike, you sustained a torn quadriceps, and you kind of have a history for battling through various injuries and ailments. How?
It's interesting. I at that moment in time, I thought for sure, my trip was done. And I told Jenny, I'm like, it's done. David Horton was helping me for a couple of days in North Carolina and Tennessee. And he was just like, your body has a way to heal itself. You've been doing this for 20 years. Your body will figure out a way. And the biggest thing, as somebody who's trained as a physical therapist and having all this experience, I still had that doubt. And I think that's important, because a lot of people assume, oh, you just got through the injuries, no problem. There was a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain. But I also had to do a lot of on the trail remedying the situation. That was figuring a way, okay, I figured I would just walk the next day. I did 31 miles the previous day when, my knee and quad were so bad I could, limping was a chore.
Right.
And then figured out a way, okay, if I can walk, 30 some miles each day for the next couple of days, see if taking the load off of the knee and the quad will help let them heal a bit. And in addition to that, I was doing natural and anti-inflammatories. I even had to do some over-the-counter and prescription anti-inflammatories to really hit it. And then it was the icing. It was the pneumatic compression to help the swelling around there. So it was really kind of a combination of on the trail remedying of like decreasing the load on the knee, using the poles more, and then figuring out a way how I could just give it maximal amount of rest in the short window of 6 hours of sleep. So it was one of those things. And then again, my body did find a way to heal itself, even though I was able to run after 3-4 days, running more than hiking, and just kind of built that resistance to it. My advice would be, trusting your body. Don't always just push through the pain. I think some people just think, okay, I can push through the pain. It's just, mind over matter. And it's definitely some of that. But beyond that, you have to figure out, okay, how can I decrease the inflammation? How can I take the load off the problem area? You have to basically rehab and self-rehab.
But you also credit, it seems like, the majority of your success to your mindset. So is there one piece of advice, or maybe a few pieces of advice, that you'd offer to endurance athletes on achieving the mental fortitude necessary for success?
First and foremost, you have to be open to failure and facing your fears, because it takes a lot to put yourself out there. And I give a lot of people credit who even just start the trail. I mean, just the whole, if you think about it, how many people do something like the Appalachian Trail or run a 100-mile race or run their first 5K or 10K. You have to put yourself out there. So I think that the biggest mental barrier for a lot of people is just, facing your fears, as well as don't be afraid to try something that you think you might fail at or you may not be successful at. And then secondly, I think once you're in the moment, or say struggling, you have to find, like you mentioned, whether it's having reasons or having some reminders of why you're doing this. I think dedications, whether you dedicate your journey or the discomfort to, say, somebody who can't, or maybe somebody who's been influential in your life, maybe somebody who's passed away, maybe somebody who's struggling with a disease. Some people are also doing things for charity. And I think that can be a strong motivator too. You're not out there just for yourself. You're out there maybe for somebody else or for a bunch of people.
Thru-hikers are known for eating notoriously awful diets while on the trail. Is there one piece of advice that you'd offer to thru-hikers on how they can improve their nutrition, keeping in mind that obviously they don't have access to kitchens?
Definitely. And I fell into the same category too. I'll be totally honest. A lot of my followers were so surprised, why are you eating, vegan pizza and vegan ice cream? But the fact is, you crave calories. Probably my best advice is, when you can eat healthy, but understand too that this is a temporary situation. And then learning from that experience on the trail, that's what I'm always thankful for when I come back from, say, traveling or an experience like the Appalachian Trail and spending time out in the woods. You really appreciate the access to the food that you do have, and good food. And so I think as a thru-hiker, you can come back and I think a lot of times eat healthier, and then, making your own food and having some of your own food at, whether it's meal drops or, people who are meeting you at times, making sure that you get that along with maybe the trail junk food, things that you may not have as good access to. So.
But some in the hiking community have said that you, or really any FKT attempt, is missing the point, that you were moving too fast to enjoy the hike. What do you have to say to these criticisms?
Oh, I would say you should join me for a while, because I wasn't blazing the trail. In fact, ask some of the thru-hikers that joined me for, sometimes they would be running with me for 5 to 8 miles. I had one gentleman join me for 18 miles, in fact. And then I had times where I was hiking uphill, and I was hiking along with some other thru-hikers from time to time, and I would just share stories. And so I was still able to have this social connection, which I think a lot of thru-hikers assume FKT folks are just blazing. I also went northbound, so I had more opportunity where I was going the same direction as a majority of the hikers. And then, seeing the sounds too, I was moving a lot of miles per day, but if you look at my average pace, it wasn't a whole lot different or a whole lot faster than, say, somebody who's through hiking at a strong pace.
Sure.
So my average pace a lot of days was 3.5 miles an hour. Of course, a lot of times slower, especially up north. And I just spent more time on the trail. So I guess for some people, I experienced the trail early mornings and late at night into the wee hours of the morning, sometimes 24/7. And so I think I experienced the trail in a lot of ways that maybe some thru hikers don't. Because there were times where I wished I was in the tent or like in a warm spot,
Yeah.
and I was still having to put in another, 20 miles that day.
Right.
Sometimes at 8 p.m. it was like, okay, I've got another 15 more miles, and I would hike in and I would hear the owls and get the spider webs that were already being formed at night, and then early morning I'd get all the spider webs. So I was experiencing the trail, seeing the red F's scamper across the trail and be able to pick them up. A lot of people assume that when you're running or setting an FKT, you're blazing, but the whole thing is all about efficiency.
So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions about you?
One of the biggest, which we discussed earlier, was really the fact that, can I really enjoy it? And I think it really comes down to the fact this is how I chose to do this experience. And to go for a record, it doesn't mean like every hike or run I'm focused on a record or I'm like trying to go fast. And I think that's the real misconception, is that if I'm a runner or say a speed attempt or FKT, I think Jennifer Parr Davis was telling me too, like, she got some flack and gets flack because, could she really enjoy it? Because she was always focused on, going after the record. So I feel like it's just that kind of experience I chose to do. And I love to go out. In fact, especially after that experience, it's like, I love to go out and backpack and do day hikes and runs where I'm not moving as fast. And then there are other times where I really want to challenge myself. So it really kind of comes down to, maybe some people use the old adage of like, hike your own hike or run your own run, but we're all foot travelers. So I feel like there shouldn't be this, this attitude of like, some people are better than others and some people have a better experience than others. There's no speed limit on the trail. We're all out there moving our own bodies. We're not on motorized vehicles. We should be, I guess, encouraging one another.
So obviously there's a lot of controversy surrounding your summit at Baxter State Park. What would you say is the biggest misconception about what happened on that afternoon? And if given the opportunity to go back and do anything differently, would you?
Well, I think the biggest thing is I, again, don't think I was, above the rules or felt like I needed special consideration because I had broke a record or because I was going after this record, or I'm a runner, not, a thru hiker who's doing it traditionally and staying in my own tent and sleeping along the trail. I essentially, started that morning or that midday hike, much like any other hiker, where I was going up and it was my wife's birthday. I was finishing the trail. I knew I would break the record unless something unforeseen happened on the trail. And I was just trying to enjoy it. And a buddy of mine surprises me with a bottle of champagne, who he actually checked in and said, "Hey, would this be okay?" The rangers at the bottom, they said yes. So it was one of those things where I had no idea what was happening. He hands it to me, and it was just a natural reflex to like celebrate, much like I think a lot of thru hikers do. And it was just unfortunate that it unfolded in a way where I was falsely accused of things I didn't do, such as I had basically a group of 12. That was the legal limit, and that was of course said that I didn't have 12. There were a lot of people up there, wanting to see me finish, who didn't even know what was going on until they had gotten to the top. People said, "Hey, yeah, this guy's finishing the record, and he'll be up here." So people stuck around, and they were people that joined me along the way, and that was kind of out of my control. The other element too was, as far as the champagne and littering, it was just kind of shocking. I mean, I get the fact where, yeah, if everybody spilled beverages at the top of the mountain, it may not, be the best, but at the same time, I wasn't doing anything wrong in that regard. So I wish in the end that Baxter State Park had communicated with me in a professional manner instead of attacking me, instead of saying I did things that I didn't do. And just use me to further their causes. I wish we had communicated properly, and I could have gotten the message out to other thru hikers, like, "Hey, this I should have brought champagne up to the top. It sounds like I had violated a rule that I wasn't aware of, and we should be aware of those rules." And we could have educated hikers.
Do you have any interest or intent in thru hiking another trail at a non-FKT pace, just for the joy of hiking?
Definitely. Like Jenny and I talk about we're doing sections of the Pacific Crest Trail right now, and just because we haven't dedicated, a full 3-4 months to it, but we talk about, if something, changed and we had the opportunity, we just go for it and do it all in one shot. But for right now, we're doing sections, and at this rate, we're doing essentially 1 week a year, which we're going to have to up the ante. Otherwise, it'll be a 20-year project. I tell people, don't limit yourself.
Yeah.
Get out there however you can, even if it's a weekend or a few days.
Yeah.